welcome to Reportage. This is Danish bin Nabi. In today's segment of Reportage, I am joined by David Lepeska, the author of The Desiccated Land and American Kashmir. Let's listen into him about this book. David, as you write in the book, in the beginning of this book, you start by saying that Americans have failed in intervening as far as the Kashmir problem is concerned. Explain this to the viewers. Why did the Americans fail Kashmiris?
Well, I mean, the first failure, I would say, is the fact that president after president, American president that is, has said that it's a bilateral issue for about, 6 or 8 presidents now, even though Bill Clinton said Kashmir was the most dangerous place on earth. President after president has said it's a bilateral issue to be solved by India and Pakistan. Fine, it's a reasonable approach. But the problem is that at the same time the U.S. said this, it has had a major, if indirect, impact in Kashmir. As I explained in the book, the U.S. gave billions of dollars in weapons and funding to Afghan mujahideen in the 1980s to fight off the Soviet invasion. Everybody knows this. This is widely known. It was detailed in Steve Cole's great Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Ghost Wars. And it's no coincidence that Kashmir's insurgency started just as that conflict headed towards its end. Kashmiris who had crossed the border to become militants in the mid to late 1980s received their training in Pakistan and Afghanistan and often ended up using American-made weapons in Kashmir. This has been laid out in considerable detail in the book, and it's clear that U.S. policies helped drive the insurgency in Kashmir. And not only that, just last year, we saw another reminder of this. After the U.S. departure from Afghanistan in 2021, U.S.-made weapons have again turned up in Kashmir. They were found by the Taliban in Kabul and elsewhere and funneled to Pakistan-based terror outfits and ended up in Kashmir again. So we've seen this again and again and again, that U.S. claims, it has no role in Kashmir, that it's between India and Pakistan, but then helps support the insurgency indirectly.
Point well taken, David. Now, you were in Kashmir at a time when Musharraf's 4-point formula was going on and the back channels were going on at that time. That's 2006 and 2007.
Right.
What's your reading of the situation? Where did it all go wrong?
I mean, I'm no expert on those back channel talks. They were a back channel and so largely secret. Most expert observers attribute the failure to reach a deal in early 2007 to the collapse of Musharraf's political capital in Pakistan because of economic troubles, because of the military gaining increased power again. I can't be sure of what happened. I'm not an expert on Pakistan, Indian, secret negotiations. But yes, while I was in Kashmir, those back channel talks were not only happening, but they were progressing, and they most reports say India and Pakistan have gotten as close to a deal on Kashmir as they had gotten since the most recent war. And in the book, when I interview Mirwaiz Umar Farooq, he actually mentions a possible announcement between India and Pakistan in the weeks ahead. Like, it never happened, but he was on the verge of expecting a deal. So that's how close it was, but it never happened.
You have extensively covered Kashmir. You know tradition, you know culture, you know people, you know almost every aspect of the Kashmiri society. And you obviously have an eye on the international scenario, the geostrategic position of Kashmir. What is your view is the most probable solution to the Kashmir problem?
I don't think any solution is likely, unfortunately. The main problem is that nearly every party benefits from the status quo. Angry Kashmiris, frustrated at their governance system at India, have an outlet for their frustrations. They protest or they become separatists. India can claim to be pluralist and welcoming to Muslims while also having a rogue, separatist-minded state region now where it can highlight and flex its military might. And of course, at the same time, the continuing violence in Kashmir gives Delhi a reason to not hold the plebiscite it promised 70 years ago. Pakistan's military and Pakistan-based terrorist groups use Kashmir to drive recruitment and funding. Kashmiri politicians, they don't offer solutions really to the problem, but they just take handouts from Delhi to peddle the government's policies to Kashmiris in more appealing language, or to steal elections, as Farooq Abdullah did in 1987, soon leading to the insurgency. So if everybody didn't benefit, if all the more powerful players didn't benefit, some solution might emerge as the best, but everybody benefits. And the only people who don't benefit are, of course, the vast majority of peace-loving Kashmiris, who I'm afraid will continue to suffer for foreseeable future.
So in other words, you are saying that Kashmiri politicians, mainstream politicians, are basically part of the problem and not a part of the solution, right?
I mean, I don't want to put all of them in the same bucket, but yes, they have to do that because, well, Kashmir hasn't had elections now in more than 4 years, of course. So there is no democracy to speak of. There are no really effective, impactful politicians right now in Kashmir. But previous to the revocation of Article 370, you couldn't gain favorable coverage and thus a decent amount of votes if you didn't, at least to some extent, embrace Delhi's positions on Kashmir. So yes, Kashmir politicians have to some extent have to be guilty of kind of almost an anti-Kashmiri position in order to be elected, in order to have power.
You have also seen these Kashmiri separatist politicians. Do you think they have the capability, the vision to take Kashmir forward, to take Kashmir towards a logical conclusion?
I would hope. I mean, I don't know who you mean, like
I mean,
Gilani?
I mean Mirwaiz, the Gilani Saab, I mean Yasin Malik and all these people.
Well, Yasin Malik is in prison right now in court, and I don't. It doesn't seem like it. They haven't made any impact recently, and Delhi, now that there's no democracy, is just ignoring any separatist-minded or independence-minded or even just autonomous-minded assertions in Kashmir. So I don't see those politicians making any impact anytime soon, at least while Modi is in power.
In your book, you have also mentioned and at length about your meetings with Aga Ashraf Ali. How do you view Aga Ashraf Ali? What about his contributions to Kashmir, particularly as far as the education sector is concerned?
That's an interesting. I mean, I would say his son Aga Shahid Ali has contributed more to Kashmir. You know, he was sort of Kashmir's unofficial poet laureate. He wrote, "Country Without a Post Office" and all these wonderful, heartbreaking poems about Kashmir that everybody from separatists to politicians to analysts to the everyday people on the street had some familiarity with. So I would say he's had a greater impact. But having said that, Aga Ashraf Ali definitely made an impact on the education system in Kashmir. He definitely shaped it. He was also one of the first to challenge Kashmir, Sheikh Abdullah, the state's first chief minister, and pushed back on the extent of education that was needed. So he definitely strengthened the education sector for his 50, 60-year career, mostly in the state.
But you still consider his son, Aga Shahid Ali's contribution more than his father?
Surely, yeah. He's much better known. He's an international award-winning poet. Kashmir has much more pride in regards to Aga Shahid Ali than to his father, which is totally understandable. And I get that, but I never met Aga Shahid Ali. So for me, Aga Ashraf is a much more impactful figure. And in fact, I dedicated the book to him because I spent so many wonderful afternoons and evenings with him, engaging with him on Kashmir and global politics. And he was just a fantastic man to talk to. And we lost him in 2020. And that's one of the reasons that this book came about.
Coming back to the politics, how do you view August 5th, 2019 decision, the unilateral decision which New Delhi took? What are your views about?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that it enabled Delhi to add to the presence of the military went from something like 500,000 to 600, 650,000. The checkpoints are more enforced now. There's less mobility in Kashmir, number one. Number two, it has refrained from holding elections. It promised to bring back elections after the revocation of Article 370, but it has not yet done so. So it's this militarized, non-democratic, I would say, state, but it's not a state anymore. Also, it's a region. So that's the first part, a more difficult life for Kashmiris. The second thing is the state, New Delhi claims the reason it revoked Article 370 is to increase development in Kashmir. But we have yet to see that. There was, tourism has increased. That is clear. That is totally true. But the state investment in the state has not increased. There's been a good deal of promised investment, including from the Gulf. Talk of building this massive kind of like, a world-class shopping mall in Kashmir, but none of that has happened yet. There's a lot of talk of investment and development, but it hasn't happened. So people remain skeptical. Let's see what the next couple of years bring. Will it be continued lack of democracy and lack of mobility and lack of free expression, or will things start to change?
What, in your view, is holding back New Delhi from holding an election in Jammu and Kashmir? Why they do not hold an election?
Because it can.
Why?
Holding an election will mean the expression of views that don't align with New Delhi's. If they're not separatist or even independence minded, they'll certainly talk of more autonomy for Kashmir, more rights for Kashmiris, more freedom for Kashmiris, which is all, acceptable and legal under Indian law. But New Delhi would prefer not to have such expressions voiced. And so since it can keep elections from happening, and nobody seems to be complaining because they can't, because half the journalists are in jail and activists are being pressured or put in jail. So might as well go as long as they can without holding elections, especially since, as I said before, the U.S. is again failing. The U.S. has no comment on it when it comes to India for the G20. When it brings Modi to the White House, it says nothing about Kashmir and the suppression of rights there.
Taking this thread forward, you have seen that recently Mirwaiz was released. And in the book, you have extensively quoted his interview of 2006, I guess, towards the end of 2006.
2007, yeah.
It's in the book. Do you think he's one of the sane voices, a reasonable voice from Kashmir region?
I do. He seemed a very reasonable man. He was very open. When we spoke, he talked about his father's assassination, which he saw right in front of him. He was 16 years old, and he had to grow into this role, hereditary religious Muslim role in Kashmir. Is he a great advocate for Kashmiri rights? I'm not sure. It's difficult to be a good one these days, considering the force applied from New Delhi. But definitely, he came off to me as a decent man.
And he has that caliber to take Kashmir forward.
I hope so. I mean, there's a lot of pressure on him now. He's kind of the one. I mean, I don't think many Kashmiris trust Mehbooba Mufti or Farooq Abdullah or Omar Abdullah. Certainly not Ghulam Nabi Azad. Like, none of those politicians are trusted. They're all seen as in the pockets of Delhi. But Mirwaiz is seen differently. He's seen as more Kashmiri, as more pro-Kashmir. We'll see how it goes in the months and years ahead.
David, tell me one thing. Why this book? What was the power behind it? What was the intention behind it? Why did you write this book?
It's a good question. It partially was driven, as I mentioned before, by Aga Ashraf Ali's passing, which reminded me of all this great, well, let's not say great, of all this quality work I did back in Kashmir 15 years ago at the time. Now it's 17 years ago. And right around the time that happened, Kashmir Observer, my old employer in Kashmir, for which I wrote much of the writing in the book, reached out and said, we would like to publish a couple of books for our 25th anniversary. And we thought of your writing. And so the two ideas came together, and I I added this new kind of narrative of my personal story around my old journalism from Kashmir. And it turned into what I think is a decent book. And so very little of the writing in the book was envisioned as a book when it was written, but now I think it works as a good encapsulation of what's been happening in Kashmir over the last couple decades.
David, any fond memories of Kashmir you would like to share with the viewers?
Oh my gosh, so many fond memories of Kashmir. I mean, one is that, I hope this doesn't sound funny, but it's very unusual. In fact, I don't think it ever happens in the US or in the West even for men to hold hands. One time I was in a tuk-tuk with a colleague of mine from Kashmir Observer, Farooq, who I mentioned in the book repeatedly, and he held my hand. And I was just, and then we did it again walking down the street, and it felt so kind of warm and collegial and just close. And that kind of, it symbolized my connection to Kashmir. Experiencing a wazwan, which has something like 30 courses of marriage where you just eat endlessly, and I almost burst. I mean, the scenery, the people, the endless, fantastic memories. And in fact, I was hoping to go there this spring to see people again and promote the book, but India rejected my visa application. So I couldn't go. So now I'm unable to even go to India or Kashmir and see my friends there and revisit these places again.
Before I ask my last question, I must ask you one more. What should the Americans do? How should they view Kashmir now? What about their policy as far as Kashmir is concerned?
It's clear that the US has made Kashmir and other domestic, let's say, human rights and rule of law issues secondary to making India a strongest ally possible in the face of China's rise. That's clearly the American position, and it's understandable. I get it. China is a much larger power than India right now, and the US needs all the allies it can get in opposing it. But this just means that the US is not going to be coming to save the day for Kashmiris or for other persecuted minorities in India anytime soon. That's just the simple reality, sadly.
Towards the end of this book, you write about your girlfriend who is in Turkey. When Turkish authorities did not allow you to get back to Turkey, are you in still touch with her? What about her? Because you did not talk in the book about her, then what basically happened?
It's a very personal question. But yes, in 2016, when I was kicked out of Turkey,
mentioned in the book. That's why I am
right. In 2016, when I was kicked out of Turkey, I was with a Turkish woman at the time, and it was a very difficult time. I lost my job, my home, the place where I was living, my girlfriend. And yes, we did meet again, and we tried to figure out a way to stay together and make it work. But she was finishing her studies, and I could not go in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I could not go to Turkey anymore. So there was this, should she give up her life in order to be with me? Where would we live? And it just never, she actually applied for a visa to the US and was rejected. It was right around the time Trump was putting in place the so-called Muslim ban. So it never worked out. We're still in touch. We're still friendly. We still talk about meeting possibly, but years have passed now. And to some extent we've moved on, though we're still connected. But thanks for asking.
David, thank you very much for talking to me. It was a nice interview.
Thanks so much, Danish. It was a pleasure.
Please subscribe to our channel Reportage and press the bell icon to remain updated.